The promise we made to ourselves. Fade in from black, low ambient hum, a single piano note repeats. I used to believe every crime story ended the same way. Someone commits an act so unthinkable it fractures the world around it. Investigators chase shadows. Families grieve. And eventually, if we're lucky, justice arrives in the form of handcuffs, a courtroom, a verdict we can point to and say, there it is, that's the end. That belief is comforting. It's also wrong. Because some crimes don't end, they echo. And some victims don't just disappear once. They vanish again and again and again. This is the story of a child who disappeared 3 times, and of the people who refused to let the truth disappear with him. The photograph that wouldn't let go. I found the photograph in an archive box that smelled like dust and old paper. It wasn't labeled dramatically, no red circle, no handwritten note screaming evidence. Just a black and white image. A hospital nursery. Metal bassinets lined in rows, white sheets folded tight, fluorescent lights overhead, and in the center of the frame one crib that was unmistakably empty. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Because the longer you look, the more unsettling it becomes. Not because something is missing, but because no one noticed when it went missing. That crib belonged to Paul Joseph Fronczak. And on April 27, 1964, in Cook County Hospital, Chicago, someone walked out with him as if they belonged together. When uniforms were trusted, America in 1964 trusted appearances. Hospitals were places of healing, nurses were symbols of care, and danger, real danger, was something people believed lived somewhere else. So when a woman wearing a nurse's uniform entered the maternity ward, no one stopped her. No one asked for credentials. No one questioned why she was alone. No one followed her when she left. She carried a newborn wrapped in a blanket. And just like that, Paul Fronczak vanished. There were no alarms, no security footage, no dramatic struggle. The most terrifying part? It was easy. The wait that never ends. Paul's parents did what parents always do when the unthinkable happens. They waited. They waited by the phone. They waited for updates from police and the FBI. They waited for the sound of footsteps that might bring their child home. The investigation exploded outward. Flyers were printed. Leads were chased. The media descended. And then slowly everything went quiet. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The bassinet stayed empty. And in that silence, hope turned into something heavier: endurance. America needs a happy ending. In 1966, nearly 2 years after Paul's disappearance, police in New Jersey found a toddler wandering alone. No parents, no identification, just a frightened child. Authorities compared photos, measurements, timelines. Was he Paul Fronczak? He was close enough. And when the Fronczaks were asked to look at him, something powerful happened, something human. They wanted it to be true. The country wanted it to be true. Cameras clicked as the child was returned to Chicago. Headlines declared a miracle. A nation exhaled. A missing baby had been found. Case closed. Except it wasn't. It was just buried. The life built on a question mark. The boy grew up as Paul Fronczak. He learned the story the way children learn bedtime tales, only this one ended with applause and relief instead of sleep. You were kidnapped as a baby, they told him. But you came back. He lived a normal life, school, friends, birthdays, milestones. But beneath every celebration was an unasked question. What if this isn't who I'm supposed to be? No one wanted to hear that. Because questioning the miracle meant reopening the nightmare. The second disappearance. DNA, doubt, and the man who lost his name. The question no one wanted asked. There's a moment in every long-running investigation when the silence becomes louder than the evidence. For decades, the Paul Fronczak case lived in that silence. Officially, it was solved. The baby had been found. The family reunited. The country had moved on to newer tragedies, fresher mysteries. But quietly, almost imperceptibly, cracks were forming. They showed up in medical records that didn't quite match, in childhood memories that didn't line up with timelines, in the subtle, nagging sense that something about the story felt unfinished. The man who had grown up as Paul Fronczak felt it most of all. He couldn't articulate it at first. It wasn't fear or panic. It was dislocation, a feeling like living in a house where the furniture never quite stayed in place. Still, he kept going. Because questioning who you are isn't an abstract exercise. It threatens everything. Science that changed everything. Science doesn't care about happy endings. It doesn't care how much a story means to you or how many years you've lived inside it. DNA testing arrived quietly, like a visitor who doesn't knock before entering. At first, it was just curiosity, a way to put lingering doubts to rest, a confirmation that the miracle was real. The man known as Paul agreed to the test. He expected relief. What he got instead was an erasure so complete, it's difficult to describe. The results were unequivocal. He was not biologically related to the Fronczaks. There was no ambiguity, no margin for interpretation, no technical loophole to hide behind. The identity he had lived under for nearly 50 years evaporated in a single conversation. What it means to lose a name. We talk about identity as if it's philosophical. But when it's taken from you, it's physical. It lives in your chest, your posture, the way you introduce yourself to strangers. When the DNA results came back, the man who had been Paul Fronczak didn't just lose a label. He lost a childhood story. He lost a sense of origin. He lost the answer to the most basic human question. Where did I come from? And worse, he realized something else. If he wasn't Paul Fronczak, then who was he? And whose child had he been taken from? The unseen victim. This is the part of the story that almost no one talks about, because it's harder to process than the original crime. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. The man raised as Paul Fronczak was himself a kidnapping victim. Somewhere, sometime, another family had lost a baby. They had waited by the phone. They had wondered what they did wrong. They had lived with a hole in their lives that never closed. And unlike the Fronczaks, they were never given hope. Their child didn't make headlines. There was no reunion, no miracle to soften the loss. That disappearance had gone unnoticed. Cost of truth. When the truth surfaced, it didn't bring closure. It brought chaos. The Fronczaks were devastated. The man they had raised was still their son in every way that mattered, but the name, the history, the story they had clung to for decades had been built on a mistake. And the man himself? He stood at the center of the storm, stripped of certainty, knowing that his very existence was evidence of a crime no one had solved. Yet he didn't retreat. He didn't ask for silence. He did something rare and quietly heroic. He kept going, following the threads no one followed. Reinvestigating a closed case is like walking through a house that's been abandoned for years. Files are missing, witnesses have died, memories have decayed. But the man once called Paul refused to let the truth stop at "not you." If he wasn't Paul Fronczak, then the real Paul had to be someone. And that meant reopening records most people assumed were settled forever. Infant death reports, unidentified remains, cases that had been misfilled, mislabeled, or simply forgotten. This wasn't about reclaiming a name. It was about restoring the discovery no one was prepared for. The answer didn't come dramatically. No midnight phone call, no dramatic revelation under fluorescent lights. It came in paperwork. Dry, bureaucratic, almost cruel in its simplicity. Years earlier, an infant's body had been found. No name, no family, no identification. Just another tragic entry in a system overwhelmed by the volume of loss. The dates matched. The circumstances aligned. The evidence was undeniable. The real Paul Fronczak had been found decades ago, and no one had known who he was. Third disappearance. This is where the story breaks something in you. Paul Fronczak didn't just disappear when he was stolen. He disappeared again when the wrong child was returned. And he disappeared a third time when his death passed through the system without recognition. 3 vanishings. 3 failures. Not of one person, but of institutions designed to protect the most vulnerable. The horror isn't just what happened. It's how easily it happened. Grief without memory. The Fronczaks were told the truth long after it could change anything. There were no memories to reclaim, no childhood to mourn properly. Only the knowledge that their son had lived briefly and died anonymously. And yet, in that knowledge, something shifted. Paul Fronczak was no longer a mystery. He was no longer a rumor or a question mark. He was real. And that mattered. Man who chose to stay. The man raised as Paul Fronczak could have walked away. He could have let the truth exist without him. But he didn't. He chose to speak, to document, to insist that the story be told correctly even when it cost him comfort, certainty, and peace. In doing so, he became something else entirely. Not a victim, but a witness. The hidden crime. How systems failed and why the kidnapper was never caught. When a case is closed too soon, there's a dangerous word in law enforcement. Closed. It sounds responsible, efficient, final. But in cases like this, closed doesn't mean solved. It means no longer questioned. Once the toddler was declared Paul Fronczak in 1966, the machinery of investigation powered down. Files were archived, leads were deprioritized. The question of who took the baby became irrelevant because officially the baby had been found. And just like that, the kidnapper vanished into the background noise of history. Not because she was clever, but because no one was looking anymore. Woman in the uniform. Witnesses remembered almost nothing about her. That alone should have been a warning. She was described as calm, confident, ordinary, a woman who belonged at... She didn't run. She didn't hide the child. She walked. That tells you something important. This wasn't panic, it was preparation. She knew hospitals. She understood trust. She relied on the fact that no one would challenge a uniform in a place built on authority and routine. And when she left Cook County Hospital carrying Paul Fronczak, she stepped into a city that never imagined it had just let a crime walk out the front door. Missed moments. Investigators later admitted something quietly, almost reluctantly. There were moments. A sighting that didn't quite fit. A tip that arrived too late. A description that was never followed up on. But each one was dismissed once the reunion happened. Because why chase a ghost when the child was home? This is how crime survived. Not through brilliance, but through relief. The paper trail that lied. When the truth finally resurfaced decades later, it revealed a system riddled with blind spots. Birth records that were incomplete. Infant death reports filled without cross-referencing missing children. Jurisdictions that didn't talk to each other. The real Paul Fronczak's death should have triggered alarms. It didn't. Because the system wasn't designed to imagine that a stolen child could die unnoticed while another child lived under his name. That possibility lived outside the framework. So the framework failed. Why no one went to prison? People ask this question more than any other. Why wasn't the kidnapper caught? The answer is both infuriating and simple. Witnesses died, memories degraded, evidence disappeared or was never collected properly in the first place. By the time the full truth was known, the trail had gone cold decades earlier. And justice, as we traditionally imagine it, was no longer possible. No courtroom, no verdict, no sentence. But that doesn't mean accountability vanished entirely. A different kind of investigator. When institutions failed, individuals stepped in. Journalists began reopening the story not as a miracle, but as a warning. Archivists re-examined records others had dismissed. Researchers connected dots that had never been meant to meet. And at the center of it all was the man raised under the wrong name, now insisting that the story be told accurately, even when it hurt. He didn't need to do that. But he did. What heroism actually looks like. True crime often glorifies confrontation. Arrests, interrogations, confessions. This story offered none of that. Instead, heroism looked quieter. It looked like refusing to let a dead infant remain unnamed. It looked like acknowledging institutional failure instead of burying it. It looked like choosing truth over comfort, even when truth cost you your past. These weren't dramatic gestures. They were acts of moral endurance. The record set straight. Eventually, the historical record changed. Paul Fronczak's name was restored to where it belonged, not to the man who lived under it, but to the child who lost his life before he ever had a chance to grow into it. The man raised as Paul reclaimed his own identity, one not defined by a stolen name, but by the courage to confront what had been done to him. For the first time, the story aligned with reality. And that alignment mattered more than punishment ever could. America's comfortable illusion. This case shattered something we don't like to admit we believe. That systems are inherently protective. That mistakes are rare. That truth eventually emerges on its own. None of that is guaranteed. Truth doesn't surface by accident. It has to be forced into the light by people willing to challenge the version of events that feels easiest to accept. Paul Fronczak's story survived because some people refused to let relief become the final chapter. What justice looks like when time runs out. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with acknowledgement, with records corrected, with stories retold accurately, with a child finally recognized as more than a footnote. Is that enough? It has to be. Because justice delayed beyond the reach of punishment must become justice of remembrance, or it disappears entirely. What remains when everything else is gone? There's a strange calm that settles in after the truth finally stops moving. No more theories, no more maybes, no more hoping the next document will change everything. Just facts. For years, this case had been a storm pulling in grief, guilt, hope, and denial. Now it was still, and in that stillness, one question remained. What do we do with a truth that arrives too late to punish anyone? The answer, it turns out, is not returning a name to the dead. Paul Joseph Fronczak lived for only a short time. But for decades, he didn't live at all. At least not in the way history recognizes life. He existed as a mystery, a headline, a story with the wrong ending. Restoring his name was not symbolic. It was corrective. It meant that the infant found years earlier was no longer just unidentified. It meant that a death once lost in paperwork finally belonged to someone. It meant that Paul's brief existence was no longer erased by convenience. A name is not a small thing. It is the minimum justice the dead deserve. The man who let go, The man raised as Paul Fronczak could have insisted on the name. He had lived under it, built a life around it, carried it longer than the child who was born with it ever could. No one would have blamed him. But he didn't. He let it go. In doing so, he reclaimed something far more powerful than identity. He reclaimed integrity. He allowed history to be corrected, even when it meant standing in public as the embodiment of a system's failure. That is not weakness. That is character. The parents who never stopped being parents. Paul's parents never stopped waiting. Even when they believed their son had come home, even when decades passed without new answers, even when the truth broke their hearts all over again. They had raised a child who was not biologically theirs, but who was emotionally, unquestionably their son. And when the truth emerged, they didn't retreat into bitterness. They did something extraordinary. They made room for it. They mourned the child they lost. They honored the child they raised, and they allowed both truths to coexist. That is love without conditions. Why this story still matters? It would be easy to say this case belongs to another era. The 1960s, different standards, different technology, different world. That would be a mistake. Because the failures in this story weren't technological. They were human. Assumptions, complacency, the desire for closure over accuracy, those are timeless. And they still shape how justice succeeds or fails today. The quiet heroes. There was no single savior in this story. No dramatic arrest, no courtroom confession, no last-minute revelation that fixed everything. Instead, justice arrived through accumulation. Through journalists who refused the easy version. Through scientists who trusted evidence over emotion. Through archivists who reopened dusty files. Through one man who chose truth over comfort. Heroes don't always stop crimes. Sometimes they correct history. The kind of justice we don't talk about. We are taught to measure justice by outcomes we can point to. Prison sentences, convictions, punishment. But when time makes those impossible, justice must evolve or disappear. In this case, justice looked like a false narrative dismantled, a stolen identity returned, a forgotten child recognized, a system forced to confront its limits. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The lesson we cannot ignore. This story leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. Systems do not protect us by default. They protect us only when challenged. The moment we accept a story because it feels good, because it offers relief, we stop asking the questions that matter most. Paul Fronczak disappeared because no one challenged a uniform. He disappeared again because no one challenged a miracle. He disappeared a third time because no one challenged the paperwork. He was restored only when people chose discomfort over ease. What we owe the next child. This isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning. Every missing child case deserves relentless accuracy. Every solved story deserves re-examination. Every system deserves scrutiny, especially when it claims certainty. Because the cost of being wrong isn't embarrassment. It's erasure. And the smallest victims pay the highest price. The bassinet revisited. I went back to the photograph one last time. The nursery, the rows of bassinets, the empty space. But now it looked different. Not like an accusation, like a reminder. That silence isn't neutral, that trust must be earned, that justice doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, we must be ready to recognize it. The bassinet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of truth. Paul Joseph Fronczak did not get to grow up. But he was not forgotten. His name was restored, His story was corrected, his existence was acknowledged, and because of that, he mattered not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as a human being. Justice did not arrive loudly. It arrived honestly. And sometimes that is the highest form it can take. Thanks for your time you always spend to watch our videos. We greatly value your support, so please share this video with your loved ones. Do us a favor and subscribe right away regardless of where you are watching.